Look at the body language. What a smart-ass kid. I mean, just full of himself.
Can you describe how you look in that?
Arrogant.
How old are you there?
Maybe 32, something like that. I was expected to be the spokesman for the administration's crime policy. Whether I invented it, whether I believed in it, although I believed in this one.
Don helped sell the idea of no-knocks to lawmakers for Nixon. It was a simple issue that a lot of politicians could get behind.
When did you first hear about no-knocks, and how?
I won't be able to pinpoint a fulcrum moment. It just became... There was a great deal of political hot air, political energy, to do anything that was, quote, anti-crime. And since crime at that time was almost entirely believed to be drug-related, so what do you do to make the prosecution of drug offenses easier? Police repeatedly said that by the time they knocked on the door, the toilet flushed and the evidence disappeared. It was part of the arsenal of anti-crime measures. And I bought it hook, line, and sinker and became an advocate for it.
By 1969, more than 24 states already had no-knock laws on the books. But these high-risk searches weren't used very often in those early years. A New York Times article from 1970 said that out of almost 2,000 narcotics cases, New York State Police only used the law 12 times in 1 year.
But that same year, in 1970, Nixon signed off on a law that allowed federal agents to use no-knocks. We talked about this history with Radley Balco, an opinion columnist at the Washington Post. In 2013, he published the book on the militarization of America's police forces. It's called Rise of the Warrior Cop. Radley says politicians, more than police, pushed no-knocks into the national spotlight.
Nixon specifically ran on the no-knock raid as part of his 1968 tough on crime platform, and really encouraged federal narcotics agents, and then we see states across the country kind of follow suit, to use these really hyper-aggressive tactics as a way of showing that we were tough on drugs and tough on drug, offenders. Federal narcotics officers start kicking down doors left and right all across the country. And then a very peculiar thing happens. They start getting the wrong house. Innocent people end up getting, victimized, terrorized, in some cases shot.
As these botched raids made headlines in the 70s, activists pushed back and politicians began raising concerns. Many viewed these new anti-crime policies as an attack on the black community.
No knock, the man will say, to keep that man from beating his wife. No knock, the man will say, to protect people from themselves. No knock in the head.
In 1972, the famed poet and musician Gil Scott-Heron even released a poem about no-knocks.
No knocks on my brother Fred Hampton, bullet holes all over the place. No knocks on my brother Michael Harrison, jammed a shotgun against his skull. For my protection, who's gonna protect me from you?
Those concerns escalated in the early 70s.
The interesting thing is, I think, about this history is that there was a time when Congress was sort of horrified by what was happening with these raids and that innocent people were getting victimized by them and, had some shame and remorse.
Congress held hearings and actually voted to repeal the federal no-knock law in 1974. But this move was largely symbolic. Radley said that police kept requesting no-knocks and judges kept approving them. And the use of no-knocks ramped up again after President Ronald Reagan came into office in the 1980s.
The Reagan administration took Nixon's drug war metaphor and made it very literal. They encouraged and set up grants for these joint task forces where anti-drug police groups were training with military groups.
Over the next several decades, deploying SWAT teams for narcotics raids became common. And in response, people kept challenging whether no-knock raids violated the constitutional right to be protected from unreasonable searches and seizures.
In the opinion of the court number 945707, Wilson...
There were several key cases on no-knocks that came before the U.S. Supreme Court in the 1990s.
What is a constitutional requirement on police officers if they have a valid warrant, appear at your door? Can they enter without knocking and announcing?
In a case in 1995, the justices ruled that police were generally required to knock and announce themselves before searching a home. But they also acknowledged that there could be exceptions.
And a few years later, there was another landmark case, Richards versus Wisconsin. Justices unanimously rejected Wisconsin's argument that police were never required to knock and announce themselves for searches in felony drug investigations. Here's an exchange between Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and Wisconsin's Attorney General James Doyle.
May I ask you, in doing that, if you have any statistical evidence that you want to point out to us that demonstrates that it is more dangerous to officers to knock and announce than not to? Is there any place we could look for that?
Your Honor, the best that we can do is what is in our brief, which shows that drug dealing is dangerous and it's dangerous to police. But frankly,
Today, experts estimate that across the country, police carry out tens of thousands of no-knock raids every year.
Anger boiling over tonight after suspected drug dealers shoot several Houston police officers who were trying to shut down a drug house.
4 officers were shot. A 5th injured his knee. 2 are in critical condition tonight.
One of the bloodiest no-knock raids in recent memory happened in Houston. On January 28, 2019, a narcotics squad forced their way into the home of a white couple, Regina Nicholas and Dennis Tuttle. An officer killed their dog as police burst through the door. Then, officers said Dennis opened fire, and they shot back. Police killed Dennis and Regina in their living room. The injured officers survived, but one was left paralyzed.
Judge Gordon Markham had been at home watching the news on television when he learned what happened. He'd been a municipal court judge in Houston for a long time and had signed off on many no-knock warrants during his time on the bench. Instantly, he knew that he was the one who had signed the warrant.
What was going through your mind at that time?
Oh, the pain and suffering that our police officer had taken.
I went to speak with him last summer at his home in a gated community in Houston. I didn't have an audio recording kit with me, so I used my phone to record our conversation. The tape quality isn't the best.
My gosh, we had a zillion officers blocking off the streets everywhere and all. Mm-hmm. So they apparently were really ready for a battle.
Eventually, an investigation by the Houston Police Department found that the officer who requested the no-knock warrant had lied on the affidavit. The department has declined to talk about the case because of a pending lawsuit by the families of the victims. The officer who requested the warrant had said that a confidential informant had bought heroin at Regina and Dennis's home. But in court documents, the Houston...
Oh, you see that, don't you? They lie. And they lied in Marvin's case. You see? So I can't stand this cops never lie and this attitude by judge. Oh, all he cares about is the cops. He didn't care that those 2 people lost their life. And they were white, by the way, which no one ever cares about. That's why it gets on my nerves when they make this solely about color. I'm not saying color doesn't play a role, but that proves it's not solely about color. The cops targeted them and didn't care that they were white. You see that? It proves that the cops lie and they make stuff up. And they'll say, oh, the confidential informant told us this. But when you look at like Marvin's case, when they said, oh, a CI said they made 3 drug buys from Marvin. And yet when you look at the information that's in Marvin's case file, the police records, okay, what they recorded during their surveillance, it's so ridiculous. I don't know how that got a warrant signed. How is this probable cause? Oh, there was a lot of foot traffic around his apartment and around his vehicle, and he went back and forth from his vehicle to his apartment a lot. It's the ghetto. No offense, it's the ghetto. There's always going to be foot traffic. Man, you go to any ghetto in America, you go to any hood in America, you're going to see kids in the summer, if it's hot, it's freaking Texas. They're out and about, they're doing their thing. This was springtime. So you had people out and about, you had kids running around, you had people doing their thing in the neighborhood. Of course, man, go to any hood in this country when it's warm out, especially in warm climates and in warm cities, in states down south or out west. You're going to see people out there year-round like that. Here in Rochester, when it's summertime, when it's springtime, you see people running around, kids running around, walking around, playing on the sidewalk, people hanging out. That's what you see. In any American hood, that's what you're going to see, more than any other place.
Ready for battle.
Eventually, an investigation by the Houston Police Department found that the officer who requested the no-knock warrant had lied on the affidavit.
There you go.